Now, in our previous lessons, we have created this new constructor method, and we used it to create other attributes inside it. You might even remember that I've discussed that in other programming languages we use properties or variables. We declare them outside the method declarations or method definitions, but inside the Coldfusion, this Adobe Coldfusion, we need to define our attributes inside the inside a method, and we're doing this inside the constructor method. The constructor method, let's not discuss about this public. I'll be actually dedicating a separate section for discussing these access modifiers, which are actually known as the access modifiers. They actually provide the way of containing the visibility. So there are 4 types of them. The first one is public, then we have private, then package, and the remote. I'll be discussing about that, so don't worry. But by default we have the public ones set by Coldfusion, so we don't need to use that. Now, when we talk about a constructor method is actually a representative of the component that we already created. What we know about representing or representing a certain component, we know that when we talk about a representation, suppose if you have some experience with other programming languages like Java or C#, they might not give you this constructor method, but there are languages like PHP who will give you the ability to create a constructor method. Now, the constructor method usually in other languages will start with something like maybe construct, but they will also use something like construct. So this is the usual way of writing in the modern PHP 5.6. It was actually introduced in PHP 5. So if you do not have any sort of experience with constructor methods, so let me explain it to you. The constructor method, as I've already told you, it's like an ambassador. It's like the ambassador of the component. When the component is implemented, we have just created the component, or we have just created the plan to create our object. Now, the component, why am I telling this component has no real existence? I actually mean that an object, when we create an object out of that design, out of that component, that object has an existence inside our memory. But the component itself is just the design. It defines it declares and defines the behavior of the object. It defines and declares the actions of the objects, but it does not do anything by itself. Out of that plan we create an object. So this component by itself does not exist inside the memory. When we create an object out of this component, out of this design, out of this plan, we are assigning a memory space for that object. So when we call this component, we'll be in a short span of time we'll be looking at how to create our object. So when we create our object, we need to call in the constructor method. Now, the constructor method, as I've already told you, it's like the ambassador of the component. It represents the component, or you can also say it is the heart of the component. So a heart of the component means that without it, the object, the component won't be able to create any sort of object. So it will be a problem if you try to create an object out without using this constructor as this constructor method. Now, this constructor method, why am I talking about being the ambassador for the component? When the component is run, when the component is implemented to create an object, the first thing the compiler will look at is whether it has some sort of constructor method. So if it has some sort of constructor method, that constructor method gets run first. Now what we mean by the constructor method is that when you first implement that CF component, that constructor method works like a foundation. So suppose for a building, you can't create that, you can't build that building, or you can build, suppose you want to build a 5-story building. The building will be 5-story high, but you first need to go and create the foundation, a base for that building. Without that base, you won't be able to establish that 5-story building on that piece of land. So the constructor method works in a similar fashion. When the component is first run, when we want to create that object out of this component, the constructor method goes inside the memory and it creates a foundation for that object. It creates a base for that object so that we can then onward build on top of it. So when we already have the constructor method, when it already created the base, we then can implement the actions that are defined inside the component. We can then use all the attributes, or perhaps the features. We can then implement all the attributes of that component. We can implement all the actions of that component that are defined inside our this .cfc design or .cfc file, or the plan that we are talking about. In here, you're looking at a structure. We created a structure, we stored variables inside them, but the thing that we need to notice in here is the use of this attributes keyword. If you do not use them, the problem is we are not actually saying, if we do not use them, we are not actually saying to the Coldfusion compiler that we are not saying that we are using it. I mean, the Coldfusion component will get confused if you do not use this attributes keyword. So to make it clear to our compiler and to make it clear that we are going to use attributes, we're going to declare or initiate attributes inside our component, we need to use this attribute before any sort of variables or any sort of structures, or even any sort of arrays. So you might be wondering what this return this means. If you're new to programming, absolutely new, you do not have any sort of experience, or this is the first starting point for your programming knowledge. If you have already started with learning with Coldfusion or the CFML or the Coldfusion markup language, then you might have some confusion with this. But if you're from other programming backgrounds, you might easily understand what this is doing. Nonetheless, let me explain it to you. The return keyword actually is, you can think of it as if like a factory. This constructor method is some sort of a factory. So what happens inside the factory is that we can take the analogy of input and output that we provide, the input that we provide in a factory, and we get an output from it. Now the factory, the first thing that we need to do is, suppose we want to create clothes. We want to produce clothes in our factory. The input that we need to give is raw materials. So the factory takes all those raw materials. Like if you want to create clothes, it will take cottons to create threads, and from those threads it will be producing clothes, and it will be producing colors to apply on those clothings. So when we provide some sort of input, when we provide the raw materials to the factory, it processes everything. After it processes, like it takes the cotton and it processes it to create threads. So it processes everything, then again it produces the cloth, and it provides the finished product in packaged form. You might see that clothings are packaged. So that's an output to us. So it provides that clothing, that finished product in a packaged form to us as an output. We get the output as packaged, as like our clothing being packaged inside a box or inside boxes. So in a constructor method, you can take the analogy of that clothing factory. It first, although we're not providing any sort of arguments in here, we'll be talking about what an argument is, what an argument will be doing, but it does not take any sort of argument right now. Now, yet this the arguments will be passing in a different way. Will be to protect our codes, to protect our structures, perhaps to protect our attributes. We will be encapsulating them inside our getter and setter methods. So those methods will take in all these attributes, and they will also take user inputs. Suppose your user passes in data, and it will take those data. Then it will take the attributes from the constructor method. It will set those values to the attributes, and then it will process and it will return those attributes to the template file. The template file is with the extension of .cfm. It will return that template file for our viewing on browser. Now let's get back to the analogy. So this return this means is that it's taking the constructor method is first processing everything. It will take the values, it will take inputs from our getter and setter methods. We'll be looking at those very shortly. Perhaps I'll be creating them right now after I finish off explaining this return this statement. So it will take all those inputs, and in here what you see is that we have